They said it was just $1, just another broken animal too far gone to save. But when Callie Monroe stepped into that dusty Montana auction barn, everything went quiet. In the far corner, a Mustang lay trembling, starved, scarred, nearly forgotten. No one saw a reason to care, but she did. Not because he was strong, but because he was still breathing. And sometimes that's enough. What happened next? No one expected. Before we begin, tell us where you are watching from. And if this story touches your heart, please subscribe for more. The late afternoon sun drooped low behind the ridges of Missoula, Montana, casting the dusty livestock auction yard in amber and shadow. The air smelled of old hay motor oil and the thick, tired breath of animals that had been shuffled, sold, and taken. A few stubborn clouds hovered in the wide sky, but the weather held dry quiet still, just like the last few souls remaining in the barn. Most of the crowd had already gone. The earlier excitement, the bidding wars over prized colts and sturdy pack mules, had faded into boot scuffs and tired murmurs. At the center of it all stood Randy Teague, the auctioneer, a lean man in his 60s with a weather-worn face and a voice hoarse from years of barking numbers into microphones. His sweat-dampened hat sat too low on his brow as he cleared his throat for the final time that day. "All right, folks," Randy said, dragging out the syllables like he already knew no one was listening. "Last lot of the day. Mustang. Male. No papers. Condition? Critical." The murmurs stopped. Even the flies seemed to hesitate as all eyes turned toward the far corner of the barn, where a steel gate creaked open. Two young handlers wheeled out a slumped form on trembling legs. The horse, if you could still call him, that was a shell. Dust they'd written in chalk on the crate's side, though no one had ever said his name aloud. His coat was torn with mange clinging in clumps to sharp bones. His ribs jutted out like someone had carved him out of driftwood. His head hung low, eyes dull and defeated. Someone in the back muttered, "Wouldn't make it through the weekend." Another voice chuckled. "Looks like he's already halfway gone." Near the barn's exit stood Callie Monroe, a 27-year-old woman with deep brown hair tucked under a faded ball cap. Her face was pale under the shadows, not because she was frightened, but because she was remembering. Her denim jacket, oversized and sun-faded, hid arms crossed tightly against her chest. She hadn't meant to be here. Her friend Micah, a cheerful stable hand from the neighboring humane ranch, had dragged her along. He'd already stepped out for a smoke, unaware she'd stayed behind. Callie's eyes locked onto Dust's. Not frightened eyes, not even pleading, just still, resigned. It was the same expression she remembered seeing in her sister Lila's eyes 2 weeks before she passed away, eyes that had seen too much pain to ask for anything more. The room faded. The voices blurred. The smell, the dust, the whispers all melted into nothing. "All right," Randy muttered, already beginning to close the book on the day. "No bids." "Will, $1," Callie said. Randy froze. Heads turned. Callie stepped forward, her voice soft but steady. $1. Randy blinked, scratched the back of his neck, and gave a half-hearted chuckle. "All right then. Sold." Someone laughed behind her. She just bought herself a problem. Callie didn't answer. She moved toward the paperwork table with quiet steps. Dust hadn't lifted his head. He didn't even flinch when they loaded him into the trailer. The handlers barely spoke as they closed the gate. The chains clanged, the door creaked shut, and the truck's old engine groaned awake. Micah returned just in time to see her climbing into the passenger seat. "You serious about this?" he asked. She nodded, buckling her seatbelt without a word. Halfway down the gravel road, Dust let out a dry, hollow cough, then collapsed entirely on his side. Callie twisted in her seat to look through the rear window. Through the iron bars of the trailer gate, she could just make out his eye still open, still looking. If he's still looking, she whispered, then he's still trying. The ride back was silent. Back at the ranch on the edge of Missoula, the air had cooled. A faint wind whistled through the pine trees that lined the fence. The barn lights flickered as they rolled into the lot, and Micah jumped out to open the trailer. "You sure about this?" he asked again, softer this time. Callie didn't answer. She walked to the trailer, opened the side door, and crouched beside the Mustang. "All right," she whispered. "Let's try." She slipped one arm beneath his chest and the other under his back legs. He was lighter than he looked, mostly skin and exhaustion. His body sagged, but he didn't fight her, didn't even blink. She carried him across the paddock, past the barn to a small rehab shed she'd cleaned earlier that morning, just in case. It had soft bedding, fresh water, and a bowl of soaked pellets. Callie laid Dust down on a folded blanket. The second she let go, he curled into himself, hiding his face beneath his body. She didn't speak. She didn't pet him. She just sat down back against the shed wall, knees to her chest. Outside, the wind picked up. Pine needles scratched against the shed's tin roof. Night was falling fast. She dipped a cloth in warm water and wiped the dried blood from his jaw. Carefully, silently. "You don't deserve to end like this," she whispered into the dim. His ear twitched. That was enough. The next morning, she didn't check her phone, didn't make coffee. She just walked straight to the shed, barefoot on cold earth. Dust hadn't moved, but when she knelt beside him and began to speak nonsense, really about the weather and the way the sky had turned pink before sunrise, his eyes opened, and they followed her. The night deepened over Missoula like a thick wool blanket. Frost began to creep over the rooftops and fences, silvering the fields as the temperature dipped. Callie Monroe stood in the shed doorway, her breath curling in front of her face in soft white clouds. She watched Dust's body rise and fall, slow and shallow, curled on the blanket like a crumpled coat someone had forgotten to hang. She hadn't slept. Not really. After carrying Dust into the rehab shed, she'd made a bed for herself out of 2 stacked bales of hay and an old sleeping bag she kept from college. She didn't trust the silence. It felt too final, too close to goodbye. The shed was quiet except for Dust's breath, a rhythmic rasp that reminded her of the ventilator that once lived in her sister Lila's hospital room. She turned away from the memory, setting a kettle on the portable camping stove in the corner. By the time the water simmered, she'd dipped a clean rag into the warmth and returned to Dust's side. She cleaned the dried blood from his hind legs using slow, careful strokes. A few flakes of scab came away, revealing pink, healing skin beneath. When her hand brushed near the muscle above his flank, his ear flicked. Just once. But it was real. "You're still in there," she whispered, almost afraid to hope. As she tended to him, a soft knock sounded at the barn door. 2 slow taps, like someone unsure whether to interrupt. It was Delaney Brooke, the ranch's night caretaker. 52 years old, tall and broad-shouldered, with hands like cracked leather and eyes the color of old pennies. She had once worked as a vet tech, but found more peace in working the land than hospitals. "I saw your light," Delaney said, holding a wool blanket in one arm and a thermos in the other. "Figured you'd be here." Callie gave a tired smile. "Thanks." He's holding on. Delaney stepped inside, kneeling slowly beside the Mustang. Her movements were practiced, gentle. "I remember seeing him once years ago, before things went wrong." Callie looked at her, surprised. "You've seen Dust before. He didn't have a name back then. Came through a wild holding facility. There was something in his posture. Pride. Like he wasn't used to being caged." She reached out and placed a palm just above Dust's ear, not touching, just offering warmth. "That pride's still in there, I think. Just buried." The women sat in silence for a while. Then Delaney poured 2 cups from the thermos-spiced cider, steaming sweet in the cold. "Any idea why you chose him?" Delaney asked. Callie hesitated. "I don't know. Maybe because no one else did. Delaney didn't respond. She just handed Callie a second wool blanket and rose with a soft grunt. "If he makes it to morning, you'll need to call Dr. Mays. He still lives out near the canyon bend." "I remember him," Callie said. "He treated my dog when I was a kid." "Good. Because if anyone can help a broken horse, it's him." Delaney left quietly, her boots crunching on the frost outside. Morning arrived slow and pale. The sun crawled up behind the ridge, casting long gold stripes through the shed's dusty windows. Callie had finally dozed off, chin-to-chest, arms folded. She woke to the sound of rustling hay. Dust hadn't moved far, but he had shifted his weight. One front leg was tucked beneath him instead of stretched out. He was breathing a little louder now, but it sounded clearer, less like struggle and more like effort. She sat up straight, heart suddenly awake. By noon, she made the call. Dr. Isaac Mays, 74, was a retired large animal vet who'd lived in Missoula his whole life. He arrived just after 4 p.m. in a dented blue pickup, his white beard tucked into his flannel scarf, eyes hidden behind round gold-rimmed glasses. He moved slowly but deliberately, his vet kit swinging from one hand like a relic of an older world. Callie led him to the shed. Dr. Mays didn't speak much at first. He crouched, examined Dust's gums, checked for hydration pressed lightly around his stomach. He tested reflexes, counted breaths. Then he sat back and rubbed his chin. "Well," he said at last, "he's worse than I thought. Severe malnutrition, ulcers, early respiratory infection. But he's not letting go." He looked up at Callie. "That tells me something. Can he recover?" she asked. He didn't promise anything, just pulled out a jar of powdered antibiotics and a bottle of saline solution. "I'll leave you these. Mix them in with his food and water. He won't take much at first, but be patient." Callie nodded, accepting the supplies like sacred tools. That night, as the air outside dipped into the teens, Callie made soup from canned pumpkin and oats, something soft and warm enough for Dust to swallow. He didn't eat, but he sniffed it. She took that as a good sign. She stayed up again, not out of obligation, but out of something deeper. A kind of shared quiet. A week passed. Dust hadn't stood yet, but he no longer curled into himself. Instead, he lay with his head raised, ears twitching more often. He followed her when she moved, listened when she read aloud from a weathered paperback she found in the ranch's attic. Micah came by one afternoon with a bundle of wild grass he'd gathered. He was a wiry, cheerful man in his 30s with curly blonde hair and a boyish grin. Thought maybe the smell of the field might tempt him. Dust didn't eat it, but he nuzzled it once before settling down. "It's more than I expected," Micah said. "He's still here." "So am I," Callie replied. The third morning broke crisp and clean. A thin sheen of frost covered the grass outside the shed, catching the light like powdered glass. Callie stood by the door with a steaming cup of tea between her palms. She had gotten used to this, waking before the sun, checking the stillness, listening for a breath that still meant trying. But today was different. Dust wasn't curled in the corner. He was standing, unsteady legs quivering like thin saplings in wind, but he was upright. His neck was arched slightly, head lowered toward the food bowl where the remnants of the pumpkin oat mash sat. He leaned down, jaw trembling, then ate. Slowly. One bite, then another. Callie didn't move. Her chest tightened, her hand lifted silently to her lips. Something in her stilled, like even her breath might break this fragile spell. Then Dust looked up. Their eyes met. And for the first time since she'd brought him home, his gaze didn't fall flat into resignation. It searched, questioned, lived. Later that morning, Dr. Isaac Mays returned for a follow-up. He wore the same patched canvas coat and a wool beanie pulled low over his ears. In one hand, he carried a flask of coffee. In the other, his worn leather medical bag. "You weren't kidding," he said, impressed, as Callie led him into the shed. "I didn't think I'd see him on his feet this soon." Dust, though weakened, didn't back away. He stood still, eyes watching, but calm, as the old vet knelt beside him. Dr. Mays began his routine, checking vitals, examining scarring, peering into the horse's mouth with a penlight. Then he moved toward the hindquarters. His hand stilled. He parted the matted fur near the left flank and narrowed his eyes. "Callie," he said quietly, "come look at this." Callie stepped beside him. Under the patchy coat, just above the hock, was a faint ring of ink, barely visible, but unmistakable. Letters and numbers arranged in a tight, deliberate circle. "It's a tattoo ID," Dr. Mays said, leaning closer. "Military or federal breeding registry. Only high-performance animals get these." Callie's breath caught. "He was trained." Dr. Mays nodded slowly. "Likely for search and rescue, law enforcement, or disaster response. They don't just brand these horses for fun." He pulled out his phone, snapped a quick photo, and added, "I know someone who might still have access to the archive. Might take a day or two." As he packed up his things, he gave Dust a long look. "You weren't born to vanish, were you?" he muttered, mostly to himself. Later that evening, Callie sat with Dust just outside the shed. She'd brought him into the round pen wrapped loosely with a lead rope. He didn't resist, didn't spook. His steps were stiff but deliberate. Micah wandered by, dragging a bundle of fencing wire, his curly blonde hair wind-tossed and his hoodie spotted with oil. He stopped at the gate and leaned on the post, watching. "Is he really marked?" Callie nodded. "Well, I'll be," he said, slow and soft. "You pulled a hero out of the fire." Callie didn't answer. Her eyes were on Dust, who had stopped near the fence line and was sniffing at the grass like it was a stranger he half remembered. That night, back inside her small cabin on the property, Callie sat at the kitchen table with the overhead light off, lit only by the orange glow of the stove. A folded photo sat in front of her. Lila, her younger sister, grinning wide atop a trail horse during a campout 6 years ago. Callie's thumb traced the edge of the paper. Lila had fought a long battle with chronic illness. In the end, what broke Callie wasn't the disease, it was how everyone stopped looking, stopped trying. Lila saw it, and she stopped too. That same hollow stillness had lived in Dust's eyes, until today. The next morning brought an unexpected visitor. A woman in a gray station wagon parked near the barn and stepped out holding a file folder. She introduced herself as Janice Keene, a soft-spoken woman in her late 40s with wind-chapped cheeks and a laminated badge from the Department of Equine Identification. Her cardigan sleeves were pushed up to reveal ink-stained wrists and a watch that didn't match the time. "I run a volunteer archive for discontinued military breeding programs," she said. "Dr. Mays sent me the image last night." She opened the folder, revealing several pages of old charts, scanned documents, and a black and white photo of a young, muscular Mustang in a government training pen. "This is him." His registration name was Thunderstep. He was bred for avalanche rescue, exceptional bloodline, trained under the Sierra Command Protocol. But the program was dissolved during the federal cuts 2 years ago. Most of the animals were sold off in bulk. "Sold off," Callie repeated. "Like equipment," Janice said bitterly. "Some never made it to homes. Just vanished." Callie looked through the records, training logs, temperament notes, aptitude ratings. It was like holding someone's life in broken fragments. "They thought he was lost," Janice added. "Most of us did." Dust stood quietly behind the fence, watching them. Callie didn't speak. She didn't need to. That night, snow flurried lightly across Missoula. Not heavy, but enough to coat the trees and rooftops in sugar white. Inside the shed, Callie laid a thicker blanket for Dust and sat with her back to the wall. She didn't bring a book or music. Just silence, and Dust standing now, resting one hoof and chewing slowly through a fresh handful of hay. At one point, he walked toward her, unprompted, calm, and rested his chin gently on her knee. No command, no cue, just presence, just trust. The first real snow came on the 12th morning. Missoula wore it lightly like a borrowed scarf, just enough to soften the fields and hush the wind. The ranch glowed under a pale sky fence posts capped in white paddocks, muffled and still. Callie stood at the edge of the south pasture, gloved hands wrapped around a chipped thermos. Dust was moving again. He wasn't graceful, not yet, but he was present. His gait, while uneven, had gained a rhythm, each step firmer, more certain. Without a halter or voice command, he circled the open space in wide loops. It wasn't training, it was memory. His legs remembered what his spirit had nearly forgotten. Callie didn't interrupt. She watched quietly, letting the moment unfold. Micah leaned against the fence beside her, chewing a toothpick and nursing a bruised thumb. "You see that?" he said. "That's no accident. He knows what he's doing." She nodded, eyes still locked on the Mustang. "It's like something inside him woke up. Or never really slept," Micah added. Later that week, Delaney Brooke returned to the ranch. After a few days visiting her sister in Spokane, she brought back a box of flannel bandages and a camera with a cracked viewfinder. "Thought it might be time for a few pictures," she said, eyeing Dust, who now stood tall in the mid-morning sun, his coat brushed to a dark copper shine. The photo she captured that day was simple Dust standing near the fence line. The snowy pasture behind him, one ear tilted forward as if listening. She posted it to a local equine Facebook group with the caption, "Once discarded, now returned." The response came fast. Comments flooded in, shares multiplied. Within a day, the post had gone statewide, and then the phone calls started. The first came from Gray Ridge Academy, a private facility based in Idaho specializing in tactical rescue animals. A man named Kyle Merriman, sharp-voiced and precise, requested a meeting. "He's one of ours," Kyle said over the phone. "The program Dust came from was absorbed into our operations last year. We can offer top-tier boarding, advanced retraining, even a compensation package for the current caretaker." Callie sat at her kitchen table, Dust dozing in the paddock outside. She traced the lip of her mug before replying, "He's not up for sale." Kyle's tone flattened. "Ms. Monroe, this isn't a matter of ownership. It's about potential." "No," Callie replied. "It's about healing." The next offer came from a nonprofit in Colorado, followed by a private buyer in Texas who claimed to specialize in celebrity animal features. Someone even emailed from Oregon asking if Dust could be included in a film project about veteran animals. Each time Callie said the same thing, "No thank you." Dr. Mays stopped by that Friday, his truck tires crunching softly over packed snow. He carried a small folder containing Dust's updated health records and a note from Janice Keene confirming the Mustang's official registration as recovered and stable. He found Callie in the barn brushing Dust's coat in long, meditative strokes. "I hear you've had admirers," he said dryly. Callie sighed. "Too many." "You sure about turning them down?" "I'm not saving him so he can serve someone else," she replied. "He's already done enough." Dr. Mays watched Dust lean gently into her side. "I figured you'd say that." But not everyone agreed. On the following Monday, Roger Klenn, a stocky rancher from across the valley, with a reputation for tough horses and tougher business deals, pulled into the driveway without calling ahead. His truck bore a magnetic sign for Klenn Performance Mustangs, and he stepped out wearing snakeskin boots and a grin that didn't reach his eyes. "Morning, Ms. Monroe," he called out as Callie opened the barn gate. "Heard you've got a prize on your hands." "Dust isn't for sale," she said, arms folded. "Didn't say he was. Just figured maybe you'd want him to reach his full potential. What you're doing here, soft work, slow progress. It's nice, but that horse was built for more." "He's doing more," Callie answered. Roger laughed. "He's pacing a fence line. He could be saving lives. He already saved one." That shut him up. Roger sniffed, tipped his hat, and got back in his truck. "Suit yourself," he muttered before driving off. That evening, as the sun melted behind the mountain ridge, Callie sat in the pasture beside Dust, her back against a bale of hay. Dust stood nearby, head lowered, tail twitching gently as the wind tugged at the tips of the grass. "I don't know what they all see in you," she said softly. "Maybe it's the muscles, or the legacy. Or maybe they just want something strong that already knows how to obey." Dust turned, slightly nudging her shoulder with his nose. "But you're not theirs," she whispered. "You're yours." The wind rustled again, gentle and cold. Snow began to fall in lazy spirals, dotting her boots and his with tiny white kisses. No camera caught that moment, but Callie would remember it for the rest of her life. The summer sun rose early in Missoula, gilding the fields in gold and waking the wildflowers one by one. Bees buzzed lazily over lavender stalks, and the wooden fence posts steamed gently as the last of the morning dew burned away. In that light, Dust looked almost unreal, his coat now thick and healthy, a copper hue that caught the dawn like fire held in fur. He walked ahead of Callie that morning, trotting gently to the edge of the pasture before circling back, brushing his shoulder against her arm. He no longer watched his footing, no longer hesitated at gates. Something had settled in him, something quiet, old, and whole. Callie wore a soft flannel shirt, sleeves rolled to her elbows, and her dark hair tied in a simple braid down her back. Her gait had changed, too. Slower, more present. She wasn't waiting for something to break anymore. At the porch of the small cabin, Micah waited with 2 bowls, one of oats for Dust, and one of blackberries for breakfast. "He's looking good enough for a calendar," he said, squinting at the sunlight. "Maybe I should hire a photographer." Callie grinned. He'd pose if it meant an extra apple. Dust nickered softly, nudging Micah's sleeve as if to confirm it. That afternoon, a small girl wandered up the gravel road with her mother in tow. The mother, Danny Frey, was in her late 30s, short brown hair, a camera around her neck, and kindness etched in the creases beside her eyes. Her daughter, Lena, was no more than 7, barefoot, carrying a small notebook covered in butterfly stickers. They'd seen Dust's photo on a local community page and driven from Hamilton, an hour and a half south, hoping to catch a glimpse of the horse the internet couldn't stop talking about. "I'm sorry if this is intrusive," Danny said shyly, standing at the edge of the fence. "We just wanted to say thank you. My daughter, she's been struggling since her dog passed last spring. She doesn't speak much anymore." Callie nodded, understanding without needing details. "You're welcome to watch him for a bit." They sat together under the cottonwood tree. Lena remained quiet, her gaze fixed on Dust, who grazed calmly a few yards away. Then slowly, as if drawn by something deeper than voice or gesture, Dust lifted his head and walked toward the girl. He stopped just short of her knees and lowered his head. Lena looked up at her mother, then at Callie, then reached out and placed her hand gently between Dust's eyes. She didn't speak, but her mouth moved one word, silent and careful: "Hi." Danny's hand flew to her chest. Her eyes filled. Callie smiled. "He's good at showing up when it matters." In the weeks that followed, more visitors came, not in droves, but in quiet pairs or solo journeys. Not to train Dust, not to test him, not to own him, but to see what survival looked like. What healing looked like without banners or medals. Delaney stopped by, often bringing scraps of poetry and jars of homemade jam. Sometimes she and Callie would sit on the porch, while Dust rested in the tall grass, his ears flicking lazily at the flies. "He has a story now," Delaney said one evening, sipping tea. "Not because someone wrote it for him, because he kept living until someone listened." By mid-August, Dr. Mays made his final checkup visit. Dust stood still as he always did, letting the old vet check his heartbeat, joints, vision. "You're not just recovered," Dr. Mays muttered. "You're damn near perfect." He patted Dust's shoulder, then turned to Callie. "What's next for him?" She looked out at the pasture, then down at the soft dirt under her boots. Nothing, she said, and everything. He stays. We both do, Maze smiled. That's the best plan I've heard all year. That night, as the sun dipped low, painting the sky in shades of plum and apricot, Callie sat cross-legged on the porch. Dust approached slowly then, with the same silent grace as always lay down beside her. His head settled against her leg, his breath steady and warm against her jeans. No one else was there. No camera, no audience. Just two beings, neither rescued, neither rescuer, who had learned the quiet power of staying. I never told you why I called you Dust, she whispered, fingers trailing through his mane. Not because you were broken, not because you were fading, but because you're what's left when everything else is gone. And somehow, still beautiful. Dust blinked slowly, then closed his eyes. Callie leaned her head back against the porch post, breathing in the scent of pine and horsehair and summer rain far off in the hills. All it had taken was one nod, one choice, to stay. Dust didn't need a second chance to be a hero. He just needed someone to believe he was worth the breath it took to keep going. And in our own lives, there are people and parts of ourselves that feel forgotten, like they've lost their purpose. But healing isn't always loud. Sometimes it's one small step, one nod, one person who doesn't walk away. If this story touched your heart, take a moment to share it with someone who needs hope today. Leave a comment to tell us what part moved you most. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel for more stories like this. Stories about quiet strength, second chances, and the bond that changes everything.